San Diego.
Thank you and good afternoon. Chairman Bell and members of the Senate Committee on Transportation and Housing. My name is Rick Gentry. I'm the President and CEO of the San Diego Housing Commission. And as you can probably detect from the way I sound, I'm not a California native. However, I've spent the last 8 years of my 44-year career in affordable housing in San Diego. Some would say that the prospect of affordable housing in San Diego is an oxymoron in the first place, but we believe that it can be changed. I have two written products that we have sent to you that I will refer you to as well. One is a written report that reflects my comments this afternoon that was sent to you electronically this afternoon on addressing the housing affordability crisis in San Diego. The other is a hard copy booklet in front of you, the blue book here called the Housing Affordability Crisis. So I would refer those to you, and this particular report is the one I'll be referencing in my comments today. This particular report reflects an approach that we described as the so what, trying to answer the so what question on housing affordability in San Diego. There have been a number of reports issued in San Diego, including one about a year ago by Lynn Reeser at Point Loma University, basically positing the high cost of housing. And these reports are also reports that basically say, isn't it awful, and something must be done. Then the reports go on the shelf until the next isn't it awful report comes along. What we decided to do with the Housing Commission was to develop a report that answers the so what questions. So what do you do about it? We have a housing affordability issue. It affects affordable housing in San Diego. So what can be done to help alleviate the problem? And so in this report, I'll refer you to page 17 of 96. There are 11 specific items that we believe can be done at the local, state, or federal governmental levels to reduce cost and increase production. These include items such as shortening the approval process on the city level, deferring developmental fees, and unlocking underutilized property. We estimate that the local actions alone could reduce the cost of affordable housing construction by up to $174,000 per unit and reduce market rate housing costs by up to $51,000 per unit, and those are spelled out in this report. But before I move into the specific recommendations that we believe could be done on the state level, I would like to give you a little bit of background on how San Diego got here. And this was basically at the direction of the San Diego Housing Commission Board of Commissioners, the City Council, and Mayor Faulkner, Kevin Faulkner, all of whom, in particular the Housing Commission, directed me and staff to basically try to get at the reasons for the ever-escalating cost of affordable housing. The Housing Commission also sought input from the private sector, folks who would sometimes be at loggerheads with affordable housing types in this particular subject matter. And we have formed an alliance in San Diego that we call the San Diego Jobs and Housing Coalition. It is composed of local business and civic groups. It includes the San Diego Regional Chamber of Commerce, the San Diego Building Industry Association, the San Diego County Taxpayers Association, and the San Diego Housing Commission, not a group you ordinarily find sharing the same side of issues. It includes other folks as well, both on the housing advocacy side as well as the more business side of the equation. And we all agree that what we need in San Diego is housing for our low-income workforce families and also housing affordability for the middle class. We've spent much of the past year within this coalition working on this issue because the more we studied it, the broader and the more significant the impacts became to all sectors of our city and region. For instance, we determined that San Diego has an affordability gap currently of some $2.4 billion, or approximately 22.5% of the city's gross domestic product. If all housing were available at an affordable cost to all San Diegans, city households would have $2.4 billion more to spend into disposable income that could be applied in the local economy, creating jobs and supporting local businesses. A lack of affordable inventory is causing long commutes and congested freeways, contributing to the greenhouse gas emissions problem, and as prices escalate, the threshold of income needed to avoid homelessness rises, potentially pushing more and more people on the streets. In addressing this, the report in front of you, addressing the housing affordability crisis, was presented to the city's December 9th meeting of the Smart Growth and Land Use Committee, and the committee voted unanimously to direct city staff to work with the San Diego Housing Commission to explore how the report's recommendations could be crafted into city ordinances and advocated at the federal or state levels. The city council members described the report as a common sense way of lowering construction costs. And members of the San Diego Jobs and Housing Coalition on all sides of this issue also testified in support of the report's recommendations. And it might be useful if I could digress for a minute and talk about how this came about with this, some would say, motley crew of advocates and critics of the programs. We conducted about a 5-year, pretty heated public discussion and debate over something called jobs impact or housing impact study, which resulted in housing impact fees, which have been in place in San Diego since 1990. And during that dialogue, we discovered that there were two separate issues that were causing both the critics and the supporters of affordable housing to talk past each other, if you will. One is the issue of housing affordability, which is housing for poor people, whether they're homeless or workforce or anything in between, and that the need for housing for poor people and the need for more affordable housing to deal with that issue is present throughout our country, whether it's in expensive coastal California, rural Mississippi, or Oklahoma, is everywhere. But impinging on that is the issue of housing affordability. And housing affordability, as opposed to affordable housing, is the cost of housing for everybody other than the wealthy. And the housing affordability issue, which is prevalent particularly in coastal California, affects workforce families, it affects middle-class families, it affects the professional class families. Unless you're wealthy in California, it affects you. And it has a particularly deleterious and multiplying effect on the need for affordable housing as well. And what we've done through the City Council at the time, this was in 2014, was to achieve a compromise solution on the increase in the housing impact fee. And I'll point out the first increase in that fee that the city has seen since 1990. But part of the deal cut for increasing that fee was a common sense look at how to reduce costs altogether and to deal with the housing affordability issue in addition to dealing with the affordable housing issue. So if I may now, I referenced that page in the report on those 11 items that we've pulled out as an initial 11 that could be addressed out of the 80-some that were surfaced in this report. And of those, 8 were local. They had nothing to do with you all necessarily directly, but they have to do with processes at the city, which the city is now dealing with in a conscientious, direct fashion. But there are 3 direct issues on the state level affecting the production of affordable housing, which we submit that you all could have a positive impact on. One, as Carol just indicated, is common sense reform of CEQA, of the California Environmental Quality Act. And we believe that can be done without weakening the important environmental protections under the law. Instead, the reforms could require plaintiffs filing CEQA lawsuits to disclose their identity, radical idea, and their related interests, and whether environmental or non-environmental, to understand where they're coming from, what their interest is. It could also eliminate duplicative lawsuits against EIRs that have already been certified, and it could restrict project approvals from being invalidated because of purely technical errors in an EIR. In addition to the items that Carol pointed out could make CEQA reform not be a gutting of CEQA, but making it reflect the need for humans to have housing production in California. A second item that we think that could be addressed in Sacramento is to align the state government's oversight over housing policy, which is now split between 5 different agencies: the California Debt Allocation Committee, the Tax Credit Allocation Committee, the Department of Housing and Community Development, the California Housing Finance Agency, and the Strategic Growth Council. Those could easily be brought into some cooperative relationship to make the policies that come out of Sacramento reflect the wishes of legislatures, the needs of the citizens, and be coordinated and focused. We think that particularly for affordable housing development, the better alignment in these agencies could reduce development and operational costs and reduce the timelines for development for affordable housing. We also believe a third measure, that of increasing state and federal resources, would be a particular impact as well. Federal resources, surely we need those. But the state resources that you heard mentioned earlier, Ms. Boatman and by Mr. Metcalf, additional resources need to be brought to bear. And these programs could fill the gap left, at least part of the gap left by the loss of redevelopment as well. And most of the recommendations on these, we think that would reflect an increase in resources to go along with a more efficient utilization of the programs as well. We're very pleased to see that the legislature is planning to increase the state tax credit program in 2016. And we also are appreciative in the cap and trade programs, the veterans programs, and I think in particular, given the problem with homelessness in San Diego, the look in the Senate toward increasing the funding available for homelessness alleviation is great as well. And in closing, when the San Diego Housing Commission commissioned Lessard Development Consultants to create this report last year, we knew that we were on the cutting edge of this issue on the local level. We are one of the first public housing authorities in California to go after housing cost as a part of our problem. We want to increase the supply, and part of increasing supply is making the process more efficient. And we think that this report could be a tool for you all, very useful throughout California. We think if you change the names and addresses, the product will probably apply the same everywhere. I'd be glad to respond to questions later on.
Linda?
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Linda Mandolini. I'm the president of Eden Housing. I'm also on the board of the California Housing Consortium and its immediate past chair. I want to talk a little bit about the need and the solutions. I agree with what my colleagues have said, and so I'm not going to reiterate all of what they said, but just highlight a couple of things. At Eden, we deal with this every day. We have 8,500 affordable apartments all over the state. I have worked with many of you in your previous capacities as supervisors and council members, and we work in rural and urban locations. We have 20,000 families on our waiting list today. I get a call every day directly, and my staff fields hundreds of them from people needing housing. They need a place that will accept their Section 8 voucher. They are a homeless advocate working with someone. They're trying to get off the street and find a place for them to live. They're just a family, they're a working family. I got to move to Fremont. Where can I live? We got a project approved in Senator Wieckowski's district 2 weeks ago. I had 2 people walk up to me at the hearing and ask me when they could move in. We need short-term and long-term solutions. Carol's recommendations around the fiscalization of land use may take a little longer, so I would suggest that we should have a legislative agenda for this term that really we think of as the down payment on a long-term set of solutions. And I think, Senator Bell, you hit it on the head with the tax credit and your bill to really get the full value of the state credit. We left federal tax credits on the table last year because we didn't have enough state housing tax credit. We continue to not utilize federal resources because we're not expanding our ability to pair that with state resources. So we think this year in the budget we need to invest in affordable housing. We need either a direct budget investment or we need an allocation of state tax credits that helps us leverage tax credits. We also think that that's a down payment on a long-term permanent source for affordable housing, whether that's a bigger housing bond like Prop 1C or whether that's a permanent permanent dedicated revenue source coming from one of the sources that Carol put on her list. We believe that you really have to invest in housing to get housing. One of the interesting things about the demise of redevelopment has been what's happening at the local level. We're seeing a lot of interest on the part of our cities and our counties to help solve the problem. A number of our counties, including Alameda and Santa Clara, have dedicated their boomerang funding. Some of the redevelopment money that they inherited is coming back to affordable housing. Assemblymember Bonta has a bill that would allow those cities to borrow against that, sort of bond against it for future increment. We think the state really has a role here in encouraging the locals to invest more in affordable housing, and we would encourage you to look at how you can do that and how you can help them. A number of them are doing studies and polls to see if they can pass their own local revenue sources. I will tell you, in every poll that I've seen, the support is more than 50%. It's actually more than 60%. It is not 2/3. And so some consideration of how you lower the vote threshold for cities and counties that want to do this, I think should be in order, maybe a longer term thing, but I feel like that's a really important resource. If you're going to push the responsibility down to the locals and the counties, we have to come up with a way for them to do this. I also think that inclusionary housing is critically important. Eden is, our entire pipeline of new deals is coming from inclusionary ordinances, and a fix on Palmer, which actually also made it to the governor's desk a few years ago but did not get signed, we think really needs to happen. I think in San Jose they could have had 1,000 apartment units if inclusionary had applied to affordable rental housing. Yeah. Well, it's over now. Supreme Court made a decision, so I think it might be a good time. I also think that a lot of what we're seeing is a lot of our cities and counties working on a broader geographic level, and I think there's some limitations in the housing element that actually doesn't make it as easy to work together and across city lines as you might make it. So I think that law was great. It said to every city, you need to build X number of units in your city lines. Or identify them. No, that's my next comment, Bob. I think it really would be useful to consider, are there ways to allow counties and cities and regions to potentially cooperate on their housing element goals and create the kinds of units that we really need. And the other thing is I think there needs to be teeth in the housing elements. I mean, we've had a number of properties that we've taken on where you get to the city council and they say, yeah, no, not on that site. They write it down, but they, not necessarily any incentive or disincentive to get you approved. And I feel like having some way to appeal to a higher authority, like some of the other states have, where you have a state zoning board that you can appeal to if you're providing a certain number of affordable units in a jurisdiction, worth considering. I know it's one of those not going to happen overnight kinds of solutions. And last but not least, I think the state should identify some of its own land resources. There are DMVs, there are other places that the state actually owns that are obsolete and underutilized buildings and land that really could present opportunities to build affordable housing on. And you can think about them as mixed income opportunities, but I think the state itself should look at what its land resources are. I know you're laughing at me, Mr. Senator.
On top of the DMV, that would be affordable.
There you go. And then also, I want to mention one other area that we've worked on at Eden, and also a number of my colleagues. We have worked with every acronym the state has ever had in housing programs. The State Senate and the Assembly have been very supportive in our efforts to preserve that housing. I think that you need to continue to make sure that the stock that we have stays affordable and stays in good condition for the long term. And I think HCD has done a really good job, as has CalHFA, of working with the legislature to come up with changes to their programs and updates to their regulations, because I really feel like with the waiting lists that we face, we can't really afford to lose ground, and I think there's a role there for the legislature. So that's all I have. Thank you.
Okay. First of all, I'm glad that since Senator Cannella raised the issue of regulatory reform, that we're, of course, talking about it, because I think that was one of the purposes of this hearing. Do you think that racial discrimination occurs because of the current status of zoning laws in California? Has that been studied? And maybe somebody can comment on that. That's a touchy subject, but I think it has to be asked.
Yes. So I would say, I don't know whether it's been studied specifically around, say, the CEQA process, but certainly there are now maps of, where affordable housing has been able to be built and where it has not been built. That certainly indicates that in areas with what I would call restrictive zoning, not much multifamily zoning, that there is obviously less housing that's affordable, and a racial impact to that fact.
So has the university studied that, the school of planning? It's like,
There have been a number of studies, not my shop at UC Berkeley specifically, but I'm
okay.
happy to, provide you
Yeah.
some of that information if that would be helpful for your
one of
deliberations.
the things we have in California, of course, is, the purpose of zoning is to create livable neighborhoods and all the, controlled land use. However, we have a commercialization that's going on of residential housing that is what I call commercial rentals that's taking place. We observed this in my area during the Super Bowl when people were renting their houses out for thousands of dollars a day for people that wanted to come in for the Super Bowl. Has that had an impact on affordable housing, in your opinion, in the state of California? Those kinds of issues?
I
Has
can't
it
speak to the whole state, but I can speak to some of the higher cost areas that we work in, like Marin. In West Marin, there are a number of homes that have basically just turned over simply as Airbnb units. And I think a lot of localities are looking at how they place restrictions on Airbnb kinds of rentals, and also looking at, if you tax it, can it be a potential resource for a local housing trust fund? How do you, because you can't eliminate it, but how do you limit it in ways that aren't deleterious to the housing supply?
Okay. Richard?
I cannot speak directly or authoritatively to the racial issue, but as a native of the South, it wouldn't be exclusive to California if it occurs.
Yeah.
But I think that the issue of economic discrimination surely does happen everywhere.
Yeah, where are you from?
Originally North Carolina,
Oh, okay.
although I moved to San Diego from Chicago.
Oh.
So when San Diegans talk about the horrible densification occurring in San Diego, I laugh at them, say that it is not a dense city. But my experience is that people just don't want to see their locality change from the day after they move there.
Yes.
And it's just a disinclination to change.
Yes.
And there's an equation of growth with loss of property values, which I think is probably the opposite of what really happens. But it's a disinclination for change and for densification that is part of the problem. If you look at the growth patterns in San Diego, they're going to be around the downtown, which is a distinct, large and developing downtown, where I live as well, and also along transit corridors, where the growth needs to occur, where densification needs to occur, not just for affordable reasons, but for transportation reasons as well. So I think it's just that folks just don't like change, and they want to see their neighborhoods stay the same.
Okay, thank you. Is there one of the, I'm getting into some of the questions on this, that maybe some of the other panel members can ask in the next panel, but is there, you had the idea about a tier, the transfer fee concept of sort of pointing out the tax consequences and looking at a funding source for affordable housing for upper end transfer property at the upper end. Is there evidence that upper end housing is, how would you say, avoiding taxes due to creation of trust and other kinds of activities like that? Or how did you determine that kind of tiered transfer concept would be a reasonable way of creating a fund for affordable housing?
Right, so I wasn't looking at it from the perspective of just what the price of the actual house is,
Yeah.
but really more with respect to the equity gain. So part of that
Yeah.
might be length of time of ownership,
Yeah.
and, you know, property values have gone up, and we know that under Prop 13, your property taxes aren't going up along with that property value. So, you know, one kind of concept is to be thinking about more of a, you know, even a deferred fee, you know, so increasing the concept of a property tax, but not maybe collecting it in and along the way, but at the transfer of the property, 15, 30 years down the line, basically be collecting a deferment of what otherwise would have been a property tax going up with the value of the property.
Okay, I'm understanding it now. Okay, thank you. Other questions? Okay, we got Senator, we'll let Senator Allen go first.
Yeah, he's always,
And Senator Rakowski.
he's first in my book.
Thank you, Senators. Fascinating presentations and discussion, and I just wanted to follow up on a couple things that were just said. My first question, I guess it's a comment, but I'd love to, you know, your thoughts. I appreciate you bringing up transit corridors. I think part of what you're running into, Mr. Gentry, is that unlike in Chicago, we simply don't have good quality public transportation infrastructure in place in most places where Californians live. And obviously, there's some exceptions. But I think what ends up happening as a result is that a lot of residents see new development as leading to nothing but terrible congestion without any kind of offset or alternative for them to get around town. So, I mean, that's part of why I think it's so appropriate for this committee to listen to both transportation and housing challenges, because I see them as being so intertwined. You obviously brought up transit-oriented development as an important part of the story, and it has to be. But surely part of the challenge that we have is that we just don't have holistic, integrated, really accessible, high coverage transportation systems in place for most Californians. And as a result, it leads neighborhoods to be very skeptical of new development, because new development simply leads to more traffic in and around their neighborhoods.
Well, communities either growing or it's dying, and the new development is going to go somewhere. So the issue is the new development in my backyard or is it in somebody else's? And I think if the growth does not occur around transit corridors, and I don't mean just rail, it can also be buses, which is a principal part of San Diego's mass transit as well, then it's going to be out in the exurbs, and it's going to create worse transportation problems than in the city.
Totally.
So I think it's one of not just NIMBY, which everybody knows. You all know what NIMBY is. Do you know what notes and bananas are?
Yeah.
Note is not over there either.
All right.
And a banana has built absolutely nothing anywhere near anybody.
All right.
So I think the issue is keeping the community the way it was the day after I moved there, which cannot happen. So therefore, how do you engage in a public debate without the sort of acrimony that occurs that causes votes to, yeah.
I'm just underscoring the importance of the transportation aspect of this, and I get what you're saying about buses. I also think that they don't. You can be stuck in a bus in the same traffic with everybody else, and it makes it a very dissatisfying experience.
Oh, yeah.
So that's one kind of thought, and I think we all agree on this. It's just one thing that we certainly face in a serious way in Los Angeles. Since I'm still with you, I was noticing, first of all, I have to just commend you for this extraordinary report. It is just fantastic, and I really do hope that folks get a chance to see it. It's this addressing the housing affordability crisis, and I understand Professor Galanti was also very much involved with this. But in addition to having lots of great ideas and proposals and thoughts, it also has a lot of really extraordinary charts that are very easy to read and that kind of lay out some of the big picture challenges at play with regards to wage disparities and income inequality and some of the kind of grand economic macro forces that are impacting everything that we've been talking about today. In fact, including a really extraordinary chart, figure 16, which talks about how California has one of the highest ratios of wage inequality in the nation, and that's also part of this problem. I noticed on page 48 you had a chart here that had to do with affordability and looking at this question of building permits lagging in our most unaffordable cities. And that's certainly true, and it's certainly something I'd heard before, but I also was struck by the fact that there's tons and tons of cities who are also giving out very, very few permits that also seem to have much higher affordability. And so it didn't, I mean, while I certainly would understand the argument being made in this chart if it were kind of a more sweeping, top to bottom, left to right movement, but you've got a lot of slow growth in these high affordability cities down below these blue dots. So I just wanted to ask for some clarification on that, and I have one final question about inclusionary housing, and I'd love to go on to Senator Wieckowski.
Well, I think this is just one set of data, and there are not many permits given out in Detroit or Toledo or Dayton, Ohio, but have you ever been to Detroit?
No, they're giving out a lot of permits for Detroit.
I'm sorry, but
Yeah.
there's a lot of growth needed there as well. But it's a low-cost area because this is only part of the equation. You have a few building permits in low-growth areas, but few building permits in high-growth or high-cost areas is going to just exacerbate the problem.